It's where did you come from? Where did you go? Where did you come from, Cotton Eye Joe? Ladies, gentlemen, and Harajim of all ages, Season 1 of Diablo 4 has been an interesting experience so far. Both feeling like there is nowhere near enough stuff to do the last 3 months, but also like there's a surprising amount of depth compared to first glance at the season. Mostly the first one, sure, but hey, the depth is really nice too. Part of that depth is the more that we experiment with Malignant Hearts, the more we find out ways to augment pre-existing builds in fun ways. Before we dive into today's build specifically, I want to highlight that we've been working with Mobalytics to create written versions of our build guides through their system. That includes this build right here that we're covering currently, as well as any other build that we've ever made for Diablo 4 if you want to check it out some more. On Mobalytics, you can see them laid out nicely and smoothly, an easy way to check out the build if you just want to see it all on one page. You can use the website, you can download the app, or you can even use the overlay, which lets you look at guides without even exiting the game. Check the description down below for a link to all of this. Today I'm going to be showing you an extremely powerful druid build that mixes two concepts I've talked about before on the channel, and it becomes something absolutely beautiful, especially with the Malignant Hearts figured in. Given this build is essentially the baby of the Bounce Bolt build, which is the teleporting lightning shred that I made ages ago, and the booming Bulwark build, which uses Earthen Bulwark for its damage, I thought it would be apt to call this one Bouncing Betty, because of the frequent explosions of shrapnel. Okay, we're just gonna call it Bouncing Bulwark to make it easy, honestly, but I'm still proud of that. So essentially what's going on here is we're using the bones of the Bulwark build, boosting crit damage and crit chance massively, hardened to barrier generation as a stat, cooldown reduction as a stat, and various specific legendaries that are more unique to this. But then we've also added in Shred for a couple of main reasons. One, we replaced Poison Creeper for this, and that's because by taking Toxic Claws as a passive and having high crit chance in the build in general, we can use this to keep Poison more active even more often than it used to be because Poison Creeper had a cooldown. The second and more important reason though is that we're taking the enhancement for Shred that makes it dash with every hit, and suddenly the Bulwark build becomes incredibly fast as a result. We pull things in with our ultimate due to Malignant Heart, which makes them stack really hard on Bulwark explosions, and we have a long-lasting ultimate that we have the ability to reset relatively quickly due to the way the rest of the build works. That makes this build the king of survivability for Druid, one of the kings of mobility, taking advantage of the fastest skill that Druid has in the dashing Shred, and then also an absolute master of dealing damage, because while this is still pretty hotly debated in the Druid community as to why, Earthen Bulwark's explosions simply do more damage to enemies the higher their level is, meaning that without any worry about attack scaling, as long as you take some good legendaries to boost Bulwark itself, it can be your main skill of use in a tier 100 dungeon and get some of the safest, fastest clears out of high tier dungeons of any class. We still don't know if this is a bug or not for sure. A lot of people believe that it is. I think that it is, honestly, but if it is a bug, it has been a bug since basically the launch of the game, being used reasonably heavily by a lot of people for at least 3 to 4 weeks, so Blizzard has to be aware of it, right? And yet there haven't been any mentions of it before. They haven't said it's a bug, they haven't nerfed it, it's not even in the patch notes for 1.1.1 next week. Without hearing anything from Blizzard, there's just a point where we have to treat it as an intended game feature for now, right? And so we will, and so we build. First we'll talk about where to put your skill points and why, then we'll look at the spirit boons that the build uses, then we will drop in on the legendaries that this build has as it uses no uniques. We will talk about the Malignant Hearts as well, then also some general gear affixes and stats to aim for. After that we have the Paragon board, and then I'll leave you with any tips that I've got for you for my time playing this build myself so far. Starting off with the skills then, you are of course going to be grabbing Storm Strike, as well as its enhancement, and also Fierce Storm Strike. Altogether, this is a melee attack that can chain to 3 bonus targets. Using it gives you 15% damage reduction for 3 seconds, it has a 15% immobilized chance on hit, and a 50% vulnerable application chance, so yeah, this is extremely good. On top of that, in this build, we also use the skill to boost other things due to our legendaries, which is great as well. Then we move on to the core skill node cluster and grab 1 rank of Shred. I've got extra ranks on my gloves, but you really only need 1 rank of Shred to get this going, don't worry too much about that. Of course, you also want to take its enhancement for 30% bonus attack speed on Shred, as well as healing you on hit with it. And then Primal Shred, which gives it its own crit multiplier bonus, but also makes it dash on every single hit of the combo, creating the near teleportation that this build can have at times. Then we grab 1 passive here, which is 3 ranks of Predatory Instinct for 6% bonus critical chance against close enemies, which realistically is all enemies the way that we'll be playing with this. Then in the defensive node cluster, we grab 5 ranks of Earthen Bulwark. The extra ranks don't affect the damage of the skill, but they do affect the size of the barrier itself, so defensively, these ranks are great as our aim is 100% uptime on Bulwark anyways, so, you know, it doesn't hurt to have. Then we grab Enhanced Earthen Bulwark to make you unstoppable while Bulwark is active, and that is the other big reason this build is so strong even in high tier dungeons. It is now the only Druid build archetype that can keep 100% uptime on Unstoppable now that Grizzly Rage had that massive nerf, and that is massive for survivability. Then we take the Innate Earthen Bulwark enhancement, which is how you get your damaging component to the skill, making Bulwark explode for massive damage on enemies nearby when it runs out of barrier amount, when it runs out of time, or if you put on a fresh barrier while it is already active. The damage does scale with the barrier generation stat as well, so get a load of that if you can, and it essentially counts as a unique multiplier to damage of this skill that no other skill gets to use that way. Then we also grab Blood Howl, which is a 20% heal on a 15-second cooldown. We get its first enhancement, which makes the cooldown reduced by 1 second for every kill you get, and then we also get Preserving Blood Howl, which gives you a 15% attack speed boost for 4 seconds after casting this ability. This build kills really quickly, so as long as you are actively moving through a dungeon, outside of boss fights, this thing resets incredibly consistently. Then we also grab 1 rank of Ancestral Fortitude over here, which gives you 5% non-physical resistance bonus, which is not really that relevant, but it lets you get 3 ranks of the Vigilance passive for 15% overall damage reduction for 6 seconds after casting a defensive ability. The way that this build works, even in single target, we will be casting Earthen Bulwark more than once every 6 seconds, so this buff is genuinely just always active.
It's permanent. Absolutely permanent.
Okay.
Then we skip our companion cluster over here and go right onto the Wrath skills, 1 rank into Hurricane itself for a nice radius of damage around you while active, and this is pretty much always active with the way that the build works with the cooldown resets. Then we take Enhanced Hurricane for a 25% slow applied to anything in the radius for 2 seconds, and then Savage Hurricane for a 20% reduction to damage that enemies deal while they are in Hurricane's radius. This is an incredibly potent defensive enhancement. After that, we grab a ton of passives in here, 1 rank of Elemental Exposure to give Storm skills a 10% lucky hit chance to make enemies vulnerable, but mostly just as a gateway to 3 ranks of Endless Tempest. This increases the duration of Hurricane, but more importantly Cataclysm, by 15%, mostly allowing more uptime on the pull Malignant Heart more than anything. We're also going to be grabbing 3 ranks of Crushing Earth for a 15% damage increase multiplier for Earth skills against crowd-controlled enemies, which we cause a lot, obviously. 3 ranks of Stone Guard, which gives you a 12% damage increase multiplier on Earth skills while more than 50% of your maximum life is fortified, and then 1 rank of Safeguard, which makes Earth skill critical hits fortify you for 2% of your base life. Then we also grab 1 rank of Neurotoxin to make poison enemies get a small slow applied as well, 1 rank of Toxic Claws to make werewolf skills apply 8% of their base damage as poison over 4 seconds. This is what allows Shred to apply poison in the build, especially with our very high crit chance. Then you want 3 ranks of Envenom, which is just a 30% crit damage increase multiplier against poisoned enemies. The tooltip here says that it is additive. That's wrong, it is just a multiplier. Then we have our ultimate skill node cluster, and in here we are grabbing Cataclysm for our ultimate, which is a long base cooldown but very long duration ultimate, raining down lightning bolts and tornadoes at random locations. The damage of this is actually pretty decent even without focusing on it, but we have this ultimate because we want to pull in as many enemies as possible, so the long duration ultimate is the way to do it, and it has an incredibly long one here, while also just making a lot more sense in this build, for example, than something like Grizzly Rage, which would just totally derail it, but it does have a long duration too. We of course also grab the enhancements for Cataclysm, which gives it a 4-second longer duration, as well as making the lightning strikes of this skill apply vulnerable for 3 seconds. Then we have some passives in here too, 3 ranks of Defiance for a 12% increase multiplier with nature magic damage against elites, 3 ranks of Natural Disaster for a 12% increase multiplier on earth magic against vulnerable enemies, as well as 12% to storm skills against immobilized, stunned, or knocked back enemies. Then we also have 3 ranks of Resonance, which is an incredible skill in this build. 6% damage increase multiplier to nature magic skills in general, but that gets tripled to 18% if it is a storm skill cast after an earth skill, or an earth skill cast after a storm skill. This will nearly always apply to our Earthen Bulwark, which is our main source of damage, so it makes this incredibly strong all by itself. Then we also grab 3 ranks of Defensive Posture over here for 15% more fortified generation from all sources. Finally, for our key passive, we are of course going to be grabbing Nature's Fury. This enables the biggest synergy of the build. It gives you a 30% chance when casting a nature magic skill to auto-cast a skill of the opposite type from the same category. Combine this with the symbiotic aspect and you have a lot of potential cooldown reduction to mess around with. With that then, let's move on to our Spirit Boons. In the Deer path here, we are of course going to be taking Wariness for 10% damage reduction from elites. It's just way too good to ignore. Then in the Eagle path, we are actually doing our Bond here so we can have 2 boons. First, Swooping Attacks for 10% faster attack speed, then also Avian Wrath for 30% increased crit damage multiplier. This used to be bugged and actually be an additive, but now it's fixed and working extremely well. Then in the Wolf path, you have 2 choices based on how tanky you're feeling. If you want more fortified generation, you can go with Bolster, which should keep it topped off just fastest all the time, but if you want more damage and faster runs, you should instead use Calamity to increase the duration of Cataclysm by 25%, which also means more enemies pulled into you and just destroyed by your mere presence, really. Then finally, for the Snake Path, you want Calm Before the Storm, giving all nature magic skills a 10% lucky hit chance to reduce your ultimate skill cooldown by 2 seconds. Considering all the bonus skills that this build pops off, all of which being nature magic really, it's hard not to get your money's worth out of this one. And with all that covered, let's look into our legendaries here within the build. We have the symbiotic aspect, of course, which should absolutely be on your amulet for the 50% boost up to an 8-second cooldown reduction when you proc it, as that is important to make all of this function properly. Then I have the Mending Stone aspect on my helmet. I view this as incredibly important to the build. It makes the barrier last 3 times as long, and the big thing is while you have an incredibly high chance to reset Bulwark more often than every 3 seconds, thanks to all of our attack speed, it can sometimes take longer than that. You are beholden to RNG, and if it does, you want that barrier to stick around as much as possible, so Mending Stone is incredibly important in my eyes for that reason. Then we have the aspect of Nature's Savagery. This enables Shred and Blood Howl to trigger Nature's Fury within the build, making them function with the symbiotic aspect and actually make it work properly. Then we have the aspect of Natural Balance as well. This again works perfectly within this build. It makes Storm skills give Earth skills an up to 45% increased crit damage multiplier for 4 seconds, and Earth skills give Storm skills up to 12% bonus crit chance for 4 seconds. This gives massive damage to Bulwark more than anything else, but it also lets us set up other parts of the build with the bonus crit chance on the Storm skills. Then, speaking of crit, we have the Night Howler aspect too, which makes Blood Howl casts give you 10% bonus critical hit chance, and also makes it affect nearby companions or players for 3 seconds too. Then our final 2 offensive legendaries are actually quite similar in function. We have the Rapid aspect for up to 30% increased attack speed on our basic skill. Then we also have Accelerating aspect, which makes our Shred critical hits give us up to 25% bonus attack speed for 5 seconds. Essentially the combo here is we use Shred to apply poison once every 4 seconds anyway, the crit goes off, activates Accelerating, then you spam Storm Strike at ludicrous speed to get tons of resets off for Earthen Bulwark through Symbiotic. On our boots, we have the Ghostwalker aspect. This build holds 100% unstoppable uptime when it works, so this is just incredibly strong. We also have the Might aspect on as well, 20% damage reduction for up to 6 seconds after using a basic skill, so basically just constant 20% damage reduction in the build. Then we have the aspect of Disobedience. Even after the nerf, this is still just a really good solid defensive legendary, and we can build up stacks quite well in this build for a lot of bonus total armor. For Malignant Hearts, this one is quite similar to most of the recent Druid builds. There just sort of is a dominant 3, for Druid at least, which are of course the Barber Heart, which causes critical hits to make the target absorb damage for 2 to 4 seconds, the damage itself multiplying up every second, and then pop at the end of the duration, damaging both the monster themselves and everything around them. This turns single target damage into area of effect damage into even bigger area of effect damage, and the best part of this is that if you hit a mob's life and absorb, they will explode instantly instead of waiting the full timer, which just sets off beautiful chain reactions. Secondly, we are using the Inexorable Force Heart. This pulls up to 50 distant enemies up to you while you have an ultimate skill active. This is just the most convenient thing for both Bulwark explosions, symbiotic cooldown resetting, and then also the Barber on top of it all. Having tons of enemies piled on top of each other makes them take a lot more damage. All in all, this is an MVP level heart in a lot of builds, but it is especially good in this one. Then in our third slot, I've got the Revenge Heart for up to 20% damage reduction. It's just too much damage reduction to ignore from a heart slot, especially in a build that has more than enough killing power to get the job done at any stage, so more defense is really just the way to go with this. As far as gear, affixes, general stats, an important thing to remember is that weapon damage doesn't affect your Earthen Bulwark damage, so if you literally are only wanting to focus on Bulwark damage itself, you can use lower item power weapons with better affixes on them as opposed to most builds. Aside from that, you want to pile on any crit chance and attack speed as your main 2 things. Ranks to Shred aren't bad, but aren't necessary. Ranks to Earthen Bulwark on a chest piece would be nice, but again, that doesn't actually affect the damage, only the tankiness of it all. You want barrier generation as many places as possible though. I'm even using diamonds as my gems in my armor for bonus barrier generation, as again, this stat is basically a bonus damage multiplier for the Earthen Bulwark explosion. You want lots of cooldown reductions so that you don't have to proc Symbiotic as often between resets, and lucky hit chance isn't bad to have either, just to increase the uptime on Cataclysm pulling enemies towards you. If you want to take this even further, it requires nearly perfect gear, but you can play the low life version of this build that I showed in the original Booming Bulwark build video. Essentially, you need a near max roll of damage reduction while injured stat on your boots, on your pants, and also on an amulet, and then if you have that, you can get up to nearly 85% damage reduction while injured, which is at 35% health and under. You then purposefully get to 35% health, then activate your barrier, and your effective health goes up a ton as a result because the barrier has the 85% damage reduction on it. I don't have the gear for that yet personally, of course, but this should work extremely well with the low life version too if you have that, so you can make it for yourself. With all that covered, let's break open the old Paragon board. On the starting board, I want you to head up the left side here. Again, we have more than enough damage in the build, so a bit more armor to get is actually really nice to have. Head to the glyph socket here and then slot in the exploit glyph. This makes targets take bonus vulnerable damage depending on how much dexterity you have purchased in the radius, as well as a secondary effect of making enemies vulnerable for 3 seconds after you hit them, on a 20-second internal cooldown. So mop up all the dexterity that there is in the radius and progress up the left side for just a little bit of a damage bump, and then once you get to the board attachment gate, you want to stick on the Earthen Devastation board here with the glyph socket on the bottom right side of the board. Travel straight up and then immediately grab the glyph socket here, and inside of it I recommend putting in the Undaunted rune for bonus damage while fortified for every bit of intelligence in the radius, as well as a 10% damage reduction increase while fortified. I have this unfilled out properly just so I can show you a bit more of my Paragon board setup, but you do of course want to grab the intelligence nodes in the radius, especially once the glyph is level 15 and has the expanded radius. After this, you want to head left through the rare node and wrap up around the top to get to the legendary node itself here, which is a 30% increased damage multiplier on earth skills against crowd controlled enemies. Then head back down and left to grab the armor rare node down here, which is obviously just nice again. Then head out the left side of the board to stick on the inner beast board with the glyph socket on the right side. Take the lower path here like I have done to reach the glyph socket, and inside of this one you want to put the territorial glyph. This gives you bonus damage against close enemies for all dexterity in the radius, then also 10% damage reduction from close enemies as well. Grab the dexterity and range as well as the magic and rare nodes here, then you want to head down and left to this cluster of nodes here that gives you attack speed. Attack speed is just absolutely irreplaceable in this build. It is just absolutely key. Then we move down to the board attachment gate. We're going to be putting on the Thunderstruck board with the Paragon glyph in the top left side. So you want to head left and down through the rare node itself to get to the glyph socket, and inside of it you want to put in the Spirit glyph for bonus crit damage for all dexterity purchased in the radius, as well as a stacking damage increase debuff on enemies for every time you get a crit against them. Grab the dexterity that's in the area, and that's all that I currently have, but I will give you a bit more of my plans, which are to go back to the top of the inner beast board here, go left to go through the armor and maximum life increase rare node, then we just want to go straight up to the board attachment gate, and on this board attachment gate, we will be putting the Heightened Malice Paragon board with the glyph socket in the bottom right corner. You want to head directly to the socket using the magic and rare nodes for actual travel here, and then within this socket, you're going to want to be putting in the Shapeshifter glyph. This boosts the potency of the nearby rare nodes, which are quite good in this slot both defensively and defensively, and then it also has the secondary effect of giving all skills that change your form a 20% increased crit chance, which is obviously silly good. And that's all I've got for now as far as how to put the build together, so how do we actually play it then? Well, it is simple on the surface, but has some more intricacies to consider as well. Your main goal is to press Earthen Bulwark as frequently as possible to set off the explosions. It is your defense, it is your offense. Use Shred mainly as a movement tool to get away from enemy to enemy, but also to get a crit every few seconds and apply both poison and the accelerating aspect attack speed. Use Storm Strike to fish for Nature's Fury procs and resets on Earthen Bulwark, though you can also use Shred for that if you want to and have the spirit to do so. Hurricane should be used on cooldown. The cooldown itself will likely reset often, but you really just need to keep it so that it is active constantly. You don't need to reset it in the middle of its active duration. Blood Howl should be used pretty much on cooldown as well, but try to line up the crit chance bonus window with an explosion of Earthen Bulwark or two if you do have the choice. Then Cataclysm you just want active as much as possible. You hit enough that with decent lucky hit chances is only really unable to be used for about 10 to 15 second windows at a time, much less if you get just a little bit lucky. And basically more than anything, this activates a nearly 20-second window of pulling in distant enemies, which is silly strong with the combos the build already uses. And that's about it really. I would recommend never initiating combat without a barrier up, and ideally enter with Shred Dash as well once you do have the barrier on. Especially if the Shred Dash is a crit, it can start off a really good chain of things happening really quickly, and that'll do it everyone. My version of a build that is basically the baby of Bounce Bolt and Booming Bulwark, quite simply dubbed Bouncing Bulwark. I hope you've enjoyed this showcase and breakdown of the whole thing, and I really hope you enjoy using this for yourself if you give it a go. Like if you like the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet. Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.